history fans, and welcome to the podcast that helps you learn a little bit of history. Today we're talking about a very important figure in ancient Rome, part of the first family to rule the Roman Empire, one of the most known mad emperors, only in power for 4 years. Any guesses? No, it's not Nero, although you would be close. He's the grandson of the previous emperor Tiberius and the son of the military hero Germanicus. Today we are talking about Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, or Emperor Caligula as you probably know him, a man who I find super interesting to research, so let's get into it, and as usual we'll start at the very beginning, because it's a very good place to start. Our two main sources on Caligula's life come from Suetonius, which gives us the detail in his biography, but he is similar to the press nowadays. He lives for the drama, so just be careful. He's also writing 80 years later, which makes it even more difficult to differentiate rumours and gossip with reliable facts. Suetonius has no hesitation at just throwing something in just because it makes a good story. And Cassius Dio, who is a Greek writer, writing 100 years later, and sadly, we don't have Tacitus's Annals on Caligula. It's just missing in... Oh, I just dropped it. We jump from AD 37 to AD 47, so... useless. As with a lot of ancient sources and historical sources in general, we'll take everything I'm about to tell you with a pinch of salt. You know, apart from the obvious facts like a year or something. Biographies of him are very politicised, and the crazy side isn't always rooted in history, it's sometimes made up. He comes from a very elite background and a strong family tree that is the Julio-Claudian dynasty. He's directly linked to the first emperor and his wife, Augustus and Livia. His dad Germanicus is the grandson of Livia, and his mum Agrippina the elder is Augustus's granddaughter. So on both sides of his parental line, he's Julio-Claudian. It's nice, isn't it? Keep it in the family. He is born on the 31st of August, 12, or 12 AD or 12 CE, but as it's the same timeline as us, we're not in the minuses, if you will, I'm just going to say 12. And his name is actually Gaius, which was a popular family name along with Caesar. And Caligula, the name we know him by now, is just a childhood nickname. You see, as a child he was taken on military campaigns with his father. All his family were, because Agrippina wanted to actually be with her husband, surprisingly. On the military camps he played with the soldiers, who make him his own mini version of their uniform and boots. Boots that are called Caligulae, so he becomes Caligula. Little Boots. A cute little nickname for someone who will grow up to be anything but cute. Obviously he didn't call himself Emperor Caligula though, and Suetonius, the ancient Roman historian, calls him Emperor Gaius, so it can be assumed that the Romans knew him by his actual proper name, Gaius, and it's somewhere in historical tradition that he becomes Caligula, so we can make an easier distinction between all the Gaiuses in that family. Gaius was born, as I said, I think I already said, he was born on the 31st of August, but we don't know where. As Suetonius tells us, hang on, let me go to the right page. Gaius Caesar was born on the 31st of August during the consulship shared by his father with Gaius Fonteius Capito. His birthplace is disputed. According to Gnaeus Lentulus Gatulicus, he was born at Tibur, but according to Pliny the Elder, at the village of Ambitavium, in the territory of Treviri, just above Confluence. Pliny supports his view by mentioning certain local altars inscribed in honour of Agrippina's Purpurium. A verse which went the rounds of his accession also suggests that he was born in the winter quarters of the legions. And then it goes, born in the barracks, reared in the arts of war, a noble nativity for a Roman emperor. The public records, however, give his birthplace as Antium, and my research convinces me that this is correct. So Suetonius is going with Antium. Growing up in the military means that he moved around a lot, which in itself is disruptive, of course, and it gets even worse when Tiberius becomes emperor. They're sort of in danger because they lose the emperor's favour, because he's afraid Germanicus wants his power, when really he's quite happy with his military position. He was the general that led the Roman campaigns in Germania, or modern-day Germany, East France, and Switzerland. Germanicus is Tiberius's nephew and adopted son, so direct heir, but Tiberius is very jealous of his popularity, which then increased after his victories in Germany. Germanicus then mysteriously dies of an illness in the year 19 while in Syria, but of course there's rumours of Tiberius having him poisoned, and a man called Piso is actually put on trial for doing so. It's never conclusively proven, but it's thought Tiberius did have him assassinated because of his popularity and out of fear of the thought that he might try to usurp him. Which may have been rightly assumed, as we're told Germanicus had won such intense popular devotion that he was in danger of being mobbed to death whenever he arrived at a place. Should we hear Suetonius' version of events? I think so. So this is Suetonius on Germanicus' death. Because of the dark stains which covered his body and the foam of his lips, poison was suspected. Significantly, they also found the heart intact among the ashes after cremation. A heart steeped in poison is supposedly proof against fire. If we may accept the common verdict, Tiberius craftily arranged Germanicus' death with the advice and assistance of Gnaeus Piso. Piso, who had been appointed to govern Syria at about the same time, and there deciding that he must make an enemy either of Germanicus or of Tiberius, took every opportunity to provoke Germanicus, even when on his sickbed, by the meanest acts and speeches, behaviour for which the Senate condemned him to death on his return to Rome, after he had narrowly escaped a popular lynching. So already Tiberius is an unpopular emperor, and he's then tied in with this murder, and he doesn't allow Agrippina, Germanicus' wife, and Caligula's mum, to remarry, something that she asked for because she needed support from another man. But I spoke about that in a previous video, so go get all that gossip there. She outright tells him that she will have her revenge, so she's exiled along with her other sons who are of age in the year 29. Caligula is spared the imprisonment as he's only a teenager and instead is called to live with Tiberius, which is just absolutely wild because he's obviously going to be like traumatized from all of that whole situation, and then he's told to go and live with the man that caused it all. Like, what's going on? But he does have 2 sisters left, so silver linings, I suppose. He's already seen the brutality of these emperors growing up and is now about to live with one of the most erratic ones, who has just killed his family, supposedly, and is going more and more brutally insane. Like, why on earth is he inviting him to go and live with him? To kill him? Or is he going to teach him how to rule, as he is now next in line? Because Tiberius makes Caligula and Tiberius Gemellus, his own grandson, both heirs. So in the year 35, he's just been made joint heir. He's been hiding his feelings and getting on with things in the house, apparently. It appears that Caligula is just biding his time until Tiberius dies on the 16th of March, 37, at the age of 78. And even though he's quite old, there's still suspicions of foul play, of course. The story goes that there's rumours of Tiberius's death, so Caligula starts to take power. But Tiberius is actually alive, it's just a rumour, so Caligula hires a guy called Macro to kill him. That murderer is also supposedly the one who kills Gemellus later on too, but sorry, spoilers, I hadn't told you that yet. So regardless of the murder stories, Caligula is now emperor in the year 37, and Tiberius is dead. And he makes Macro governor of Egypt as thanks for the murdering, supposedly. When Macro gets to the docks ready to travel to Egypt, he's arrested, stripped of his titles, and kills himself the next year because of it all. So Caligula straight away is devious and a little snaky. But who was Macro anyway? Well, Caligula's first wife, Junia Claudia, good name I know, died in childbirth, so he moves on and seduces Annina, which Suetonius tells us. So Junia Claudia has died in childbirth. Gaius, he seduced Annina, wife of Navius Macro, the Praetorian prefect, not only swearing to marry her if he became emperor, but putting the oath in writing. After Annina helped him win Macro's support, he assailed Tiberius with poison, as some people think. He issued orders for his ring to be removed while he was still breathing, and when he would not let go of it, he had him smothered with a pillow. According to one account, he throttled Tiberius with his own hands, and when a freedman cried out in protest at this wicked deed, he crucified him at once. All this may be true. Some writers report that Gaius later confessed to intended, if not actual, parricide. He would often boast, that is to say, of having carried a dagger into Tiberius's bedroom with the virtuous intention of avenging his mother and brothers, but according to his own account, he found Tiberius asleep and, restrained by feelings of pity, threw out the dagger and went out. Tiberius, he said, was perfectly aware of what had happened, yet never dared question him or take any action in the matter. Then there's a few pages about poisoning him and Caligula's early reign. So yeah, Macro's wife was stolen by Caligula, and then Caligula's essentially the reason he offs himself. Caligula also annuls everything Tiberius did or was doing, which was a very popular decision with the people of Rome, who had hated Tiberius. And because Gemellus, his supposed joint heir, was younger than him, he just disinherits him whilst annulling Tiberius's rule. Gemellus is then rather tenuously accused of treason, just to be got rid of quickly. Caligula says that Gemellus has been drinking poison antidote to prepare himself because he thinks that Caligula will try and kill him, which is treason. He's accusing Caligula of trying to kill him, so that's what he's going to do in return. Gemellus is executed, all for actually just drinking medicine, but in Suetonius's words... Oh, Caligula's also horrible to his grandmother, so that's included in the next bit. When his paternal grandmother Antonia begged him to grant her a private audience, he insisted on taking Macro, the Praetorian Guard, as his escort. Unkind treatment of this sort hurried her to the grave, though according to some he accelerated the process with poison, and when she died he showed so little respect that he sat in the dining room and watched the funeral pyre burn. He sent a military tribune to kill the young Tiberius, Gemellus, without warning, on the pretext that Tiberius had insulted him by taking the antidote against poison. His breath smelled of it, and he forced his father-in-law, Marcus Silanus, to cut his own throat with a razor, the charge being that he had not followed him when he put to sea in a storm, but had stayed on the shore to seize power of Rome if anything happened to him. The truth was that Silanus, a notoriously bad sailor, could not face the voyage, and young Gemellus's, it says Tiberius, but I've been saying Gemellus, that's why I'm repeating it. His breath smelled of medicine, taken for a persistent cough, which was gaining a hold in his lungs. Gaius preserved his uncle Claudius mainly as a butt for practical jokes. So, Caligula is now emperor, and the Romans loved his dad Germanicus and his great-granddad Augustus. He's got two really great connections that he's gonna milk. Because you would, wouldn't you? He also has Agrippina, his mother's remains, brought back, which the Romans love. He's such a loving and dutiful son. He ceremonially puts his relatives' remains in Augustus's mausoleum. Of course, even if it is just ceremonial or not, and not actually like a loving son or family member, it's still a good thing to do. And he's not a complete monster right now, even despite everything I've just read you from Suetonius. Like I said, he overturns everything Tiberius did, he brings people back from exile, he cancels treason trials, and he puts writers' works back in libraries. He's getting rid of all the bad that Tiberius did, and he's hugely popular with the people of Rome, who have forgotten what he did to Gemellus, his grandmother, and his father-in-law. He did have finance issues though, arguably because he was treating his people so well. He paid bonus cash to the Praetorian Guard, and he's very extravagant, giving the public gladiator shows, circus races, and literally throwing coins at them sometimes. It's all propaganda, of course, which eventually causes him problems, because to keep being so lavish he needs money, so he's going to have to start charging taxes. To counteract his loss of money, he supposedly opens up a brothel on the Palatine Hill to raise money. Not really what you're supposed to do in a Roman society, like a brothel on the Palatine Hill. Are you mad? Come on, that's where the Roman emperors and the richest people are. That's not proper. But actually, I think he was onto something, because the richest people have the most money to spend, so that's gonna raise his money, and it's not gonna be hard on the poor people. Anyway, at least he's treating his people better than the last emperor. He even restored democratic elections, which is obviously going to be popular. It's good for the people who appreciate his civic reforms, and they've had their right to vote restored. In his early days he showed promise as an emperor, but it didn't last long, and he now starts to become known for the unspeakable deeds that he starts to commit. He did build temples, harbours, roads and aqueducts all over the empire, as well as extravagant things for himself. He expanded the empire quite effectively. He annexed Mauritania and split it into 2 provinces in order to govern it more effectively. But it's his own cousin who was the Ptolemy ruling Mauritania at the time, and Caligula had him executed to get him out of the way, but he's still expanding the empire, which is what the Romans wanted. He started the invasion of Britannia as well, which of course he never saw the success of, but he started it. It's said he told his soldiers to collect seashells off the beach as prizes of war, a story that's told to show how bonkers he clearly was, but there's not much truth to it. The slang for huts in the Roman army was musculi, which can also mean seashells, so he may have just been asking them to pack up their huts. Like, he wasn't actually asking them to bring back seashells of enemies of war. Anyway, he started the invasion over here. Sorry, sidetracked. In just 4 years, he does get quite a lot done throughout the empire. It just gets lost in the crazy. And speaking of the crazy, we are in October 37, 6 months into his reign, and he gets such a serious illness that he nearly dies. He does manage to recover, but from that point he's a changed man. He suspects that he was poisoned and not just ill, so he starts to execute and exile people that he thought were political opponents, including his father and brother-in-law and his poor grandma. So that's the point that he kills them that I read to you earlier. So he's gaining his reputation for insanity and he's cranking up the crazy. But if he was poisoned, then he's messed up his brain. But it's later on he starts going properly madly cruel. So we can't necessarily attribute the madness to the illness entirely. It is just a basis, like a starting point for, something happened in his brain. The ancient historians suggest that he was actually okay for a while after the illness, and sources are pretty consistent on that. We obviously don't know what the illness was. Many say it was something that affected the brain, but of course our Roman sources aren't actually hugely helpful on that. And like I say, the dates don't really add up for us to confidently attribute the madness to the illness entirely. It was probably a combination of that with other things. He nearly died, so he might have just been like, well, I should just do whatever the hell I want. And I'm going to, because I'm emperor. And I could just die. And no one's going to stop me if I just do what I want. And he's in the position to do that. Who's going to challenge the ruler of the Roman Empire? He makes use of his position of power, basically. So, the turning point in his reign is easy to pinpoint, but the reasoning isn't. We have all these likely reasons. It's about halfway through his reign, and Suetonius' last 2/3 of the biography he writes is just like a list of all his misdemeanours, which are actually just extreme crimes. They're not misdemeanours at all. When Caligula was ill, we know that 2 people prayed for his survival. One was an elite Roman senator who said that he would act as a gladiator if Caligula lived, and another said he would take his own life instead so that Caligula could live. And he holds them to their word. He makes the man kill himself, and he makes the senator fight, which is ridiculous. A senator being a gladiator, that's not proper. At this point, Suetonius says, so much for the emperor, now the monster. Again, about halfway through his reign. And then he just lists all the mad, unpredictable, cruel things. All the deaths caused, which is a huge number for just a 4-year reign. I've already mentioned the brothel, but he's also accused of sexual crimes, mostly of incest with his 3 sisters. Drusilla in particular, who was his favourite sister, who he even saw as a god alongside himself, and is utterly heartbroken when she dies, which I think is a big catalyst in his madness. Suetonius tells us, though, this is how distraught he was that his sister died, okay? Let me find it. Later, he took... I don't believe the incest things, but I don't know. Later, he took Drusilla from her husband, the former consul, quite unashamedly treating her as his wife. When he fell dangerously ill, he left her all his property, and the empire too. At her death, he made it a capital offence to laugh, to bathe, or to dine with one's parents, wives, or children, while the period of public mourning lasted. And he was so crazed with grief that he suddenly rushed from Rome by night, drove through Campania, took ship to Sicily, and returned just as impetuously, without having shaved or cut his hair in the meantime. Afterwards, whenever he had to take an important oath, he swore by Drusilla's godhead, even at a public assembly or an army parade. So yeah, he even has her deified, but that's later undone. Incest is taboo even then, but what was worse was he talking about himself and his sister as a god while he was alive. To claim to be a god was just outrageous. Obviously a lot of emperors are deified after they died, but he's talking about himself as a god. Like, what is he doing? He liked to dress up as gods, and he insisted on referring to himself as a god in front of other men, and he replaces heads of statues, which does not go down well. So he stole statues from Greece of the gods and replaces their heads with his own, which giving himself the highest status as a god and an emperor, which is so wrong in the Romans' eyes. He also put statues of himself up in synagogues to quell uprisings in Egypt, which obviously causes more riots. So he logically has the prefect of Egypt executed. That'll help. And a year later, there's more uprisings with the Jewish people and the Greek people not getting along. So Caligula's solution was to put an enormous statue of himself up in a Jewish temple. But he likes it so much that he has the temple converted to a temple to himself instead, which are all really good, helpful, constructive ways of dealing with things, right? He's definitely living in this reality. He also set up a temple in Rome and would just visit to see people worship him. Yeah, I can see why. Yeah, he's a little bit mad, isn't he? He still spends lots of money, but now he doesn't have the people of Rome as his reason for it. He builds himself lavish boats, palaces, and a bridge from his new palace over the Temple of Augustus to the Palatine Hill. Firstly, outrageous putting himself over Augustus in everybody's opinion. But also he can now go directly from his house, palace, where he lives, to the main temple of Jupiter on the Palatine Hill, emphasising that link that he thinks of himself as a god. It's bonkers. He has ships fitted out very expensively, and Suetonius describes them as having colonnades, swimming pools, and dining rooms like a floating palace. He also spends lots of money on parties, where he's said to roll around in piles of money. And when he ran out, he would just add taxes to things like weddings, or he'd make up allegations against rich people, so he could take their money and their property. Probably his worst idea, though, was making soldiers give up their plunder and hand it over, and auctioning off the lives of gladiators. He's also just quite deviant, which wasn't acceptable with the Romans, or, the Senate. There's still residual love for him a little bit because of who he is and where he comes from, who he comes from. And, he was literally throwing money at people before, but they're starting to see his cruelty, and he's becoming known for playing with people. The gladiatorial games are still put on for his people, but he picks weaker men who wouldn't put up a good fight. He turns everything on its head, doing seemingly deliberately the wrong thing. He's just, can you say subverting people's expectations? Constantly. He just can't just do something normally or nicely. He also apparently got bored during the intermission of one of the shows in the games, and he had the guards throw the people in the audience into the lions. Just because he was bored. Why not? Kill them all. Throw them into the lions. There's also wild animals kept for the gladiator shows, but the meat to feed them was supposedly too expensive, so he just feeds them prisoners instead. Again, rather than just doing something a bit more normal. It's doing things in just an odd way that makes him deviant and cruel and ultimately tyrannical. He's just not following the lessons that Augustus, the great first emperor, set out for him. And the more successful emperors do follow Augustus's lead of, don't disrespect the Senate, keep the army happy and the people happy, and you'll be fine. You'll be a popular emperor. Like, just follow Augustus, Caligula, come on. But he didn't follow those rules because he simply didn't care, or he didn't seem to care. Instead, he wanted the people to be afraid of him, as we know from Suetonius. Let me find the page. So this is on Caligula's madness, I'm going to say. The method of execution he preferred was to inflict numerous small wounds, avoiding the prisoner's vital organs, and his familiar order, "Make him feel that he is dying," soon became proverbial. Once, when the wrong man had been killed, owing to a confusion of names, he announced that the victim had equally deserved death, and he often quoted the tragic line, "Let them hate me, so long as they fear me." He just wanted to be feared. He's a bit like Voldemort, I suppose. Poor opinions of him also start to form because of his personal life, not just because of the way he treats the people. He's married 4 times, which isn't an awful lot for the Romans, I'll grant you that, but he dies at 28 years old, so it is quite a lot. He stole one wife from a senator the night before their marriage, and then had her executed because she snuck off to go and see him. He does tire of the women quickly and treats them awfully, but what's supposedly worse is that he's not treating the senators with the respect that he should. They don't care that he's sleeping with loads of people, it's just wrong that he's sleeping with women of elite status. That's scandalous. They should only be with their husbands. Goodness gracious, people, come on. He's he's not following the codes of behaviour that he should as an elite Roman. He's disregarding the Senate and the respect they supposedly deserve. Another reason people start to dislike him is because of his horse, Incitatus, which means very speedy. Little side note. Caligula gave the horse a marble stable with luxurious furnishings. Sometimes he told people not to disturb him. He threw him parties, and he even treated him with higher regard than people. He gave the horse a higher status than some senators. But myth-busting time. He didn't actually make his horse a consul. Suetonius suggested that it was a rumour, possibly just one of those jokes that, oh, he loves his horse so much, oh, what's he going to do? Oh, he's going to make him a consul, give a horse a title that should be given to a senator. Ha ha ha. Look at how much he loves his horse. And there was a recent biography of Caligula that claimed the rumour was created to expose how he was being treated by the senators, trying to expose the system, saying that they're the manipulative ones. Supposedly they offered him the deified status, but he was supposed to say no. It was like a superficial thing. But instead he was like, well, if you're going to offer me that, I'll take it. And the horse consul idea supposedly fits that theory that Caligula is exposing the senators as being sycophants. You're offering me all these things as just a show, so screw you, I'm going to take them, and I'm going to offer my horse a title as well, because he'll give me better advice than you anyway. Even if he was legitimately going to make his horse a senator or consul, he never actually did, so let's move on. Another linked story, not based on truth necessarily, is that Tiberius had an astronomer named Thrasyllus prophesize for him, and he said that Caligula had no more chance of becoming emperor than of crossing the Bay of Baiae on horseback. So, in 39, Caligula has a pontoon bridge built, and he rides across it like a champion, or as Suetonius tells us. But my grandfather used to tell me as a boy that, according to some courtiers in Gaius's confidence, the sole reason for the bridge was this. When Tiberius could not decide whom to appoint as his successor, he inclined towards his grandson and namesake. Thrasyllus, the astrologer, had told him, as for Gaius, he has no more chance of becoming emperor than of riding a horse dry-shod across the Gulf of Baiae. And that's the sole reason for the bridge. Caligula, was also bald, and he wore wigs to hide it, which is normal so far, right? But he's hairy everywhere else and would apparently execute people who would talk about goats in front of him because it was clearly an insult to him and his hair, obviously. And again, Suetonius tells us about it. Gaius was tall with a pallid complexion. He had a large body but a thin neck and spindly legs. His eyes were sunken and his temples hollow, although his forehead was broad and forbidding. In contrast to his noticeably hairy body, the hair on his head was thin, and his crown was completely bald. Because of his baldness and hairiness, he announced that it was a capital offence for anyone either to look down on him as he passed, or to mention goats in any context. He worked hard to make his naturally uncouth face even more repulsive by practicing fearful grimaces in front of the mirror. I'm not laughing at Caligula, I'm just laughing at that description by Suetonius. It's just ridiculous. Maybe there were too many high expectations of Caligula because of his lineage. A new golden age was hoped for under his reign, and they got the opposite. Maybe he couldn't cope with the pressure. Like, think about everything he's grown up with. Obviously, that's common in the Roman era, but it's still going to be pretty dramatic and traumatizing. It's something we're perfectly willing to accept as reasons for failure nowadays, so why not in ancient Rome? Eventually, everything catches up to him. Politicians and the Senate don't really like him. That's an understatement. And conspiracies start to form. One plot, though, gets serious and down to business in the year 40, I believe. So, here's the situation. Caligula has announced he's sick of Rome. He doesn't like it. He's going to Egypt. And the Senate and the leaders don't like that. If the emperor goes to Alexandria, then Rome loses all importance. The senators lose their power and it goes to whoever's in Egypt. And they're sick of him now anyways, so it's the catalyst reasoning they need to get together and say, yeah, let's do this. Let's get rid of him. No way is he taking our power to Alexandria. The senators get a member of the Praetorian Guard, Cassius Caira, or I believe it's Caira. They get him on side, and he has personal issues and reasons for wanting him dead anyway, because Caligula used to call him names and would laugh at his high-pitched voice and would make fun of him. So obviously the reasonable response is, yeah, the mad emperor is laughing at me, so I'm gonna kill him. So January 41 comes along, and Caligula is down in the basement of the palace, meeting with some actors who are in town for a festival. Cassius comes down the corridor with a load of conspirators, pulls out a knife and stabs him. I nearly said gun. It's not a gun. He pulls out a knife and stabs him, with the rest just joining in, a little bit like Caesar. Everyone just wants to be involved. He has 30 stab wounds, but the next emperor is Caligula's uncle Claudius, and he has the support of the other Praetorian Guard, which is bad news for the senators who murdered Caligula and were also arguing for the Republic to be brought back. So all the conspirators, including Cassius, are rounded up and killed. Cassius asks to be murdered by his own sword, which is granted. So they don't get a happy ending either. So what was it all for? Caligula was cremated and buried in the mausoleum of Augustus, but he's since been lost, they believe, because of the sack of Rome in 410. But let's end the podcast with Suetonius's version of events. Strap in, guys. On the 24th of January then, at just about the 7th hour, Gaius could not make up his mind whether to rise for lunch. Oh, before this, there's a bit about Caligula has his horoscope read and it tells him to expect to die soon, and he says beware of Cassius. So Caligula has another man called Cassius killed because he forgets that Cassius Chiron is his first name. And there's a bit more of like Cassius seeing, says that Jupiter's ordered him in a dream to sacrifice a bull and the Capitol was struck by lightning on the Ides of March, and there's a lot of freaky stuff that I would recommend you read. It's from like 57 in this version. I just think, yeah. But anyway, it'll be too long for me to read now, even though I've now just rambled for a while, so maybe I should have just read it. On the 24th of January then, at just about the 7th hour, Gaius could not make up his mind whether to rise for lunch. He still felt a little queasy after too heavy a banquet on the previous night. However, his friends persuaded him to come out with them along a covered walk, and there he found some boys of noble family whom had been summoned from Asia to perform on stage, rehearsing their presentation. He stopped to watch and encourage them, and would have taken them back to the theatre and held the performance at once, had their principal not complained of the cold. 2 different versions of what followed are current. Some say that Chaira came up behind Gaius as he stood talking to the boys, and with a cry of "Take this!" gave him a deep sword wound in the neck, whereupon Gaius Sabinus, the other conspirator, stabbed him in the breast. The other version makes Sabinus tell certain centurions implicated in the plot to clear away the crowd, and then asks Gaius for the day's watchword. He is said to have replied, "Jupiter," whereupon Chaira from his rear yelled, "So be it," and split his jawbone as he turned his head. Gaius lay twitching on the ground. "I am still alive," he shouted, but word went round, "Strike again," and he succumbed to further wounds, including sword thrusts through the genitals. Gaius's bearers rushed to help him at the first alarm, using their litter poles as spears, and soon his German bodyguard appeared, too late to be of any service, though they killed several of the assassins and a few innocent senators into the bargain. He died at the age of 29 after ruling for 3 years, 10 months and 8 days. His body was moved secretly to the Lamian Gardens, half cremated on a hastily built pyre, and then buried beneath a shallow covering of sods. Later, when his sisters returned from exile, they exhumed, cremated, and entombed it. But all the city knew that the gardens had been haunted until then by his ghost, and that something horrible appeared every night at the scene of the murder, until at last the building burnt down. The terror inspired by Gaius's reign could be judged by the sequel. Everyone was extremely reluctant to believe that he had really been assassinated, and suspected that the story was invented by himself to discover what people thought of him. The conspirators had not planned to bestow power on anyone in particular, and most senators were so bent on restoring the Republic that the consuls summoned the first assembly not to the Senate House, because it was named the Julian Hall, but to the Capitol. Some wanted all memory of the Caesars obliterated and their temples destroyed. People commented on the fact that every Caesar named Gaius had died by the sword, beginning with the one murdered in Cinna's day. And then we go on to Claudius, and that's the end of Caligula. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the podcast. I'm not sure how long it's going to be, but I hope it's sort of a deep dive episode. I really hope you've enjoyed. If you are watching, please don't forget to like and subscribe. If you're listening, I think you're supposed to download it, share it, I don't really know. Regardless, I hope you've enjoyed. Thank you so much for staying this long, and I will see you next week with the start of spooky season. I'm so excited. Yeah, I'll see you then.